Working Cows Podcast, episode 362. This episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios, and this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back the control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune in to the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com today to get the book and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast now. Very excited to be joined today by Elaine Froese. As always, a pleasure to talk to Elaine, and piqued my interest a while back with a post and with something from her email about training the next generation, and I wanted to talk to her about that. How do we train the next generation? How do we prepare them to be leaders of our businesses? What do we do to get them ready to lead significant sized businesses in terms of assets that are under management? And so just how do we do that, and what is the mindset that goes into that? So that's what we're going to talk to Elaine about today. So Elaine, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I think it's been a while since I reached out to you for this conversation, and so I don't even know what spurred it for me necessarily. You've had a very busy January and February, and so I just know that I came across something that really spurred my intrigue or interest in discussing how do we prepare the next generation, and even starting at a young age. I think that, and I appreciate the practical experience you bring to this conversation with having a young successor taking over some of these responsibilities to a large degree, a large portion of these responsibilities. So you've got some skin in the game to speak to this, but then also, before they get to that point, it's not like, oh, they're 39 years old or 36 years old, it's time to turn it over to them. What do we do in the years leading up to that, in the decades leading up to that, to help them get prepared to be successful when it comes time for them to hopefully succeed our management at a young age, rather than waiting until, we can recount bad stories, or we can just say, let's not recount bad stories, let's tell better stories, right?
So a really good place to start, Clay, is how old are you? And way long time ago, I did a series, or did some articles with Country Guide magazine about toddler succession. And it's based on the idea that culture is the glue that holds your farm or ranch together. And culture is composed of what you believe to be true, how you behave towards each other, and how you make decisions. And today, if we're talking about transferring decision-making and management to the next generation, and how do you do that well, that really talks about decision-making. And the culture is also how you talk about your ranch or your farm around the kitchen table, and what kind of passion and enthusiasm you start planting at a very young age with your family. So in our case, Ian went to went traveling in Europe. Then he went to Bible school for a couple of years. Then he went to ag school. And we said, hey, buddy, you have to decide, are you coming back to be on this certified grain farm, or are you going to do something else? And we'll give you till you're 27. So one of the things I think, Clay, is helpful is giving people timelines around by when do we need a decision as to this is what you're really passionate to farm with. And I'm in Wisconsin today as we record this, and I'm working with Compeer, and they hired Rob and Emily Sharkey to talk about their journey. And Rob was just talking about conversations where he feels, as a podcaster and talking to other farm families, a young person needs to declare, I want to farm. And the parents need to declare, I want you to farm. So therein lies a very good conversation that can happen as a teenager, can happen in your 20s. As a Hudson coach, I would like to see young people get lots of independence and great education and time away from the ranch with other managers so they see other styles when they're in their 20s. And in your 30s, it's about mastering success. And you were talking about a 36-year-old. Our son is now 35. He already owns part of the seed business, and he is the main manager. But my husband was the main manager since he was 22. So he'd had enough of doing that and was grooming Ian over the course of 10 years to take on leadership in that new role. So every family's dynamic is different, but I would think the main thing is you want to be intentional about how you're going to transfer roles and responsibilities and that decision making. And it really helps if you can talk and collaborate with your decision making.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think it's very practical. And just to make sure that I caught that, the basics of culture are what we believe, how we behave, and what we decide. Believe, behave, decide. Is that right?
Yep. Easy way to remember it.
Yep. And so I appreciate also what you said there about, I think part of what helps with bringing the next generation back is about how we talk about the farm and the ranch around the table. Is it a burden? And maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but I think that sometimes the next generation isn't excited about coming back because the farm and the ranch always seems like a burden rather than a joy. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, right. And are you passionate about agriculture? So here's a helpful tip from Michael Pantalon, who wrote Instant Influence. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being really ready, how ready are you to come back to the ranch? Or how passionate are you about being the next manager on this ranch? And if he says 9 and his spouse says 2, then you have a bit of a disalignment of values and passion. And using a quantitative number, like between the scale of 1 and 10, I think, Clay, can be helpful for a lot of different decisions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to do some coaching around leadership? And Country Guide magazine, I reached out to the editor because this last issue is called When She Leads, Watch How Farm Women like Gracie Gulak Set the Pace on Farm Transitions. And it's I read the magazine cover to cover. It was so well done. And I reached out to the editor and he said, well, people can get it digitally at countryguide.ca. And so just ask for the February 2024 issue. But it's the whole thing about leadership is something that is multifaceted in terms of skill. And for young managers, what you believe is important. Clay, what do you believe about financial transparency? I've been speaking a lot about finding fairness in farm transition. I was in Vermont this week talking to the Vermont dairy producers, and there was a lot of robust conversation in midway when we broke for lunch and then came back together. Because one of the problems is there's a fear of founders of transitioning management too early because they're afraid of losing wealth. They're afraid of the ranch going sideways. And they're also kind of a little bit humiliated because they're not really in a position of debt servicing or personal wealth that they thought they might be by the time they were 60 or 65. And the next generation is there to help service the debt and help carry the load and help grow the business. But you really need to be able to talk about everything openly and have full transparency so that you can create solutions for what's working and what's not.
Yeah, and I think that would be nested under that culture piece of believe is about shared values, right? That's kind of what you're
Right.
talking about. We've got,
And do we share the value of honesty and openness? Do we share the value of challenge? Do we share the value of teamwork? Do we share the value of a work ethic, right? Because obviously this next generation is also, newsflash, not going to put in the same long hours that you likely did or your grandfather, because life is different now and there's different demands, and also a lot of people are looking for ways to work smarter, not harder.
yeah, that piece about sharing the culture of challenge is really important, right? Because if you aren't willing to have a conversation about the way things might be if we did things differently, then that's going to change the way that the business operates, right? I mean, you have to be willing to accept being challenged, and you have to be willing to challenge well, bring that challenge
Right, and
in the right way.
to take that as right, and not to take that as a personal affront. And we, I also have been speaking with Compeer about conflict resolution as a business risk management strategy. Because if you do conflict well, you will express your emotions. You will reach out and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm just curious, why are we still feeding that way? There's another way we could do this." And so it's that collaboration of, it's okay to challenge the current way of doing things, but also learn and accept and try out and experiment new ways of doing things. And, I really give my husband a lot of credit because he's very open to Ian being innovative, which is part of Ian's personality. Likes to turn our farm into a bit of a research farm, but they do it in small pieces. They don't, sow the whole farm down to fall rye or whatever. And they experiment and they do things in small pieces and see what the outcome is. But that also begs the question about behavior and whether or not you see conflict as something to be avoided, or that conflict is a way to be clear with each other and to test things out and to adapt and put yourself in the other person's shoes. So I'm a big believer, Clay, in people saying, this makes me feel this way. So expressing your emotion. I don't know if you know what it feels like to be 67 and aging and stepping back without stepping away on this ranch, but I'm really struggling with the grain dust. And I can't do this anymore. So we're going to have to make adjustments. Or I'm struggling with the fact that you're not showing up on time because you're having to deal with putting children on the school bus, and all the other employees are kind of standing around. We really need to get things done in a more timely fashion here. So there's always going to be management styles that either help lift each other up or are clashing. And it's okay to talk about what's working and what's not working, because that's called life. That's adapting and creating solutions to create resolution, rather than just pretending that everything's okay until the next blow up happens.
Mm-hmm. And the behavior piece of this culture building, to me, is also about, are we behaving in such a way as to be financially prepared to hand this thing off? And I've sat through a number of your talks, and I really always enjoy it. And one of the things that you consistently bring up is, what's the cash flow situation of the ranch,
Yes.
of the farm? Are you financially able to transition this thing?
Viable.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And so the behavior comes down to getting ready at that level too. I mean, there's other things, obviously, and you mentioned some there.
Right. But it's pretty basic though, isn't it, Clay? I remember when you and I were together in Deadwood, South Dakota, talking to this young couple that was just beside themselves because their parents were way out of control with debt on fancy pickup trucks that they didn't need, and unaccounted for spending. And they just said to me, "Elaine, quite frankly, we do not want to have this kind of, loosey-goosey kind of way of dealing with money and cash flow and having debt that's not good debt." They didn't mind debt that's good, that is going to help them create income, but they didn't want debt being spent on toys and fancy pickup trucks. So because of my home economics degree and just the way I'm wired around being practical, finances are a great place to start, Clay. And Dick Whitman, who I've also just been meeting at my Compeer conferences here, Dick has a compensation worksheet that I give out almost like candy to help people understand what the farm or ranch is paying for and what you're responsible for, and just being able to talk about what's a reasonable expectation for income stream for the parents, because that's also holding back this transition of management to the next generation. is the parents haven't quite secured a financial plan or got certainty around where their income is going to go, because so much of the income has gone into the farm, very little has gone into personal wealth, and now they're a bit embarrassed that they're going to have to draw more from the ranch than they thought because they didn't put enough away on the personal wealth side. And so that was kind of life-changing for my Vermont dairy farmers, because dairy farming has lots of challenges with cash flow and prices and things. And young dairy farmers are living on very low incomes, which I think are like $30,000, $40,000 a year. Same with ranchers that I've talked to. And I go, hey, buddy, that sounds great. You're single now. How are you ever going to get married and have kids and spend $84,000 on living if you can't even buy any equity now when you're single? So these are all conversations that are interwoven, Clay, and people get overwhelmed. And I just think of these things. Think of income streams, think of housing, and then think about fairness to you as the successor, the parents, and to your non-farm heirs. And that's a good way to start chunking down this conversation into pieces that you can actually start having conversations about.
Yeah. Digestible. Make it small enough to get around, right? It's not, so you're not totally overwhelmed by it. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back the control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune in to the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com today to get the book and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast now. So on the behavior side of this culture, are there other things that we should mention here? Other things that need to be
I think it goes without saying that you should show up as adults, not 4-year-olds. Stop swearing at each other. Stop walking away and yelling and screaming and having drama. That's ridiculous. That's hostile, non-productive conflict behavior. And if you're having a hard time having these interesting, robust conversations, get an outside facilitator to help keep it safe and respectful so that you get into a vein of being leaders with each other to be able to talk about tough things without having a lot of anger. And anger is fine. Anger comes from hurt, fear, or frustration, but you need to talk about why you're frustrated. And you need to talk about what you need that you're not getting. And then you need to really listen to what the other generation is telling you. And Clay, we have to stop making assumptions. I just shake my head every time we're in a drilling down coaching conversation and people say, "What? I had no idea." And I go, "You have no idea because you've never asked. You've been making these assumptions for decades or for years." And a lot of young ranchers have come back on a promise, but promises don't pay the bills. And so everybody needs to get really clear about their expectations and explain their why. And don't accept bad behavior. Expect really good, safe, respectful behavior when you're transitioning the management.
Mm-hmm. And then the last piece of this culture building is decide. And you mentioned a few of the components of that before. Can you run through those again?
So decision-making 101 is we have a challenge, not necessarily a problem. You can reframe it as a challenge. You want to research what the best solution is to solving that challenge, and then you pick it, and then you focus, and then you execute. And then after you've executed the solution, then you reevaluate and say, well, was that a good decision, or is there something we would do different next time? And people just go, Elaine, where did you learn that? I said, oh, well, actually back in 1975 in Management 101 class. But it's the whole idea that people don't actually sit down, Clay, to understand that if they don't make decisions and they keep procrastinating and not talk about transferring management or roles and leadership to the next generation, they've barely made a decision. And Lance Woodbury just wrote a great dispatch about it this month in February, and he calls it a liability. It's a liability to your ranch if you are not executing decisions. And the other liability is unmet or unworked expectations, because if you haven't made decisions, you haven't uncovered what everybody's solutions are or what their expectations are. And so you have a bunch of people on your ranch going in different directions and what I call distracted management, because you aren't focusing on what you need to solve, and then you aren't executing. So decision making and being really intentional about having a forum for that, such as regular ranch business meetings, writing things down, taking pictures on your iPhone, having agendas, chopping off and only eating up part of the agenda that you can chew that day and putting the rest in the parking lot. I mean, Dr. Cole's research way back in 1997 said the families that have regular family business meetings, i.e. decision-making forums, are 21% more profitable. So what would it look like on your ranch this year if you met once a month on Wednesday, the second Wednesday of the month, every day, every time at 1:00 after you've all had lunch, and you met for 2 hours, packed it in after 2 hours, but every Wednesday, once a month, one Wednesday a month, you had these decision-making meetings, you'd be amazed what you could get done. And you'd say, wow, why didn't we think of doing this earlier?
Yeah, for sure. And with regard to succession, I think that the decision and, the culture and the decision is about asking people to decide and to declare their intentions early on and work through a process that gets them prepared for an earlier transition rather than waiting until much later in life and
what's been very disturbing to me this winter is had a great time at the Iowa Young Farmers Conference at the beginning of February, but it became very clear to me through listening to the lawyers who were speaking that the reason why some of these transitions are so stuck, Clay, is because the tax law in the U.S. incentivizes people to hang on to property until they die. And grandma's 97, still owning everything, which means her 70-year-old son and her 30-year-old grandson or granddaughter, successors, don't have access to equity that's being plugged up. And Dick Whitman and I were joking too. Dick has a workshop on pay the tax. And ranchers listening say, no, Elaine, why should I pay tax? Well, sometimes you need to make decisions to break through the tax law so that you can actually have the freedom and ability to manipulate the equity the way that you want to, not waiting for someone to die. And this is quite disturbing to me, Clay, because I talked to other young ranchers in Montana, the French family, and they're older now, but they found out very early that dad was not going to do any kind of succession planning. So they started making decisions to buy cows, stock gates, skid steers, anything that moved, anything that was movable. And they looked for an opportunity to buy access to ranch land and start up something themselves. And so the day finally came when, it was obviously that the management was not shifting to them. And they said, well, that's fine. We're moving on. And the dad said, what do you mean you're moving on? And they said, well, you were very clear when you threw the succession papers down on the floor when we presented them to you 10 years ago that you weren't interested in making a plan. So we've been building our own. Thank you very much. And that's the other thing I want to do is give hope to listeners that if the family dynamics in your farm are not a healthy culture, you're not happy working together, you're not able to make decisions, then I would start looking down the road to adopt yourself into what I call a joint venture or non-related party agreement, where you ranch or you farm with a business person who actually wants to be in business with you. And that might be radical. Well, no, Elaine, this ranch has been in our family for decades. Yes, it has. And how happy are you? Not at all. So where is it written you have to ranch or farm with your family? And where is it written you can't go into agreements and start the necessary ending of leaving when things don't work out where you are currently, and you create new opportunities with someone who you actually want to be in business with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. And you ran down kind of the succession process that you've gone through with Ian over the last few years, and it involved him getting away, getting some experience other places, making a commitment at 25 or 26 to come back, and now he's 35 and he is stepping into that role more and more.
Yeah, and also he's purchasing parts of the business. So he has purchased the seed business, and he's built a brand new seed plant, and he has employees that report to him, not to his father. But his father, my husband Wes, who's 67 almost, Wes and Ian are in what's called a joint venture. So they have their own corporations. We have Froese Family Farm Corp, and he has his corp. And they do all their accounting and buying and everything and marketing together. So they have the synergy of two corporations working together, but they also have the pride of ownership and the certainty of having their own equity too. So there's lots of different configurations, Clay, that people can make. But I'm always curious about, what are you afraid of? Or another way of saying it to when you're trying to get something out of someone is, what is the story you're telling yourself? And a lot of farmers and ranchers tell themselves that nobody can do this ranch as well as I do. Well, that may or may not be true. Another story they're telling themselves is that they're going to lose their identity if they give up too much control and power and decision-making. And, Dick and I just had supper together last week, and he said, Elaine, this logging thing that I'm still doing, I don't know if I can still keep doing it because it's getting harder and harder to find guys to take the trees away. And he got caught or stuck with that position and role because his daughter, who's the new CEO of their 20,000 acre farm, she didn't want that job. And so it looks like Dick might be retiring from being a logger if he can't find other people to fill in that role. So the other thing is, what does a good day look like to you on the ranch? What are the roles that you want to keep doing, that you're good at and skilled at, and that you still have lots of passion and energy to do? Wes is not interested in starting semi-trucks at minus 42, but this winter's been a bit different. And he's still interested in driving semi-trucks to deliver grain for market. But he's become really sensitive to the wheat dust and to the grain dust. And so he should not be the one in the bin making sure the last kernel of wheat is out of that bin. And so here's the thing, folks. You're going to age, and your body is going to change, and your expectations and your energy levels are going to change. And that's okay. But what is working for you now? What do you want to do, and what do you not want to do? But once you determine, like we did when Ian was 25 and said, yes, I want to be part of this business, then the successor effect starts jumping in full bore. And what the successor effect is, the growth or the expansion mindset and thinking that happens when you know for sure that you have a successor, and land gets bought and equipment gets upgraded and business plans get changed. But what is not healthy, Clay, is you have an opinion on your ranch, well, everyone's welcome to come back. And I'm screaming, no, because this ranch can only support 1.5 families, which means the other half of the family, it's not cut in half. It has to have an off-ranch job because the cash flow is not there. And everybody's welcome here. Yeah, everyone's welcome to come and play and help out and brand and do ranching things, but not everyone is welcome to be a business partner. We cannot make this viable for 4 families. So be very careful in your behavior and your speaking of what you promise to the next generation that you cannot fulfill economically.
Yeah, that's very good, and we'll circle back around to that in a minute. But regarding the transition that your family has been through, or is going through currently, is there anything that you would do differently? Looking back, is there anything that you've learned and said, okay, this is how it happened here. I'm going to, as I coach other people, I'm going to say, this is what we learned there. This is what we would do differently.
Well, the good thing is we had our own coach. His name's Peter, and works with our accounting firm. So he was really good at interviewing Ian and Kendra separately from us and then bringing us together for family meetings, which is what we do in our coaching team. Doing differently, we also did personal style assessments, which I think is also really important for awareness of finding out how people are wired. So Ian's very people-oriented. My husband's very task-oriented. Sometimes that causes conflict of expectations of getting tasks done in a timely manner. What Wes says we would do differently, Clay, is we would have bought more land had we known sooner that Ian was coming back. But that's woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? And so we took some other diversions of making investments that maybe should have gone straight into land. Because, of course, 10 or 12 years ago, the price of land was much different than it is now. And the decisions that we're making now is not to buy any more land, but to make the land we have more productive through irrigation and tiling and other projects. So I wouldn't say that there's a lot of regrets, but I know that in the families around us, it's just really important to protect relationships. And I have one case I'm thinking of where the parents just did not understand the opportunity they were giving up by hating their daughter's partner. And, the whole dynamic around judging people or not giving people an opportunity to prove themselves or not being economically wise with good written agreements. Those things have really come back to bite families when they've made really poor decisions based on hatred and judgment rather than on being kind and giving people a chance and really knowing what the opportunities are.
Mm-hmm. So earlier, just before I asked that question, you were mentioning we don't make promises we can't keep. We don't say everybody's welcome when really 1.5 at best is what this 1.5 family units at best is what this farm or ranch can realistically provide for. So in that scenario, that seems like a very delicate scenario. How do you pick a successor when you might have more than one that's interested? Is it an interview process? Is it share with us your mission, vision, and values and your vision for where this goes and you pick one there? Or how does that work?
Well, if you read the book or the magazine on leadership, and Kelly Dobson, who just lives 40 minutes away, runs a company called Leadership, and he's a coach trained at Royal Roads. And he and I have done some speaking together, but we both agree that you need to know who you're coming to invite to be part of your farm management team. What's their personality? What's their conflict profile? What are their skills? And Dick Whitman will say it's just because you're part of this family doesn't mean there's a place for you here. It's based on merit. And so it's his daughter, I think, who has an MBA, who's running their large operation. And she's, in her early 30s, I think, and she gives direction to her uncle and her cousins. And so in an ideal management world, it's the person who has the skills that your ranch or your farm is needing, and also who has the passion to be up at 10:30 at night, changing the screens or unplugging the seed plant or serving a customer or pulling the calf or whatever it takes. And I think that people are wise to put people into positions first as employees and have a probationary period, just like other people do in other farm industries, and see where the passion lies. And then also what the economic expectations are, because you could have one kid who doesn't know how to manage money to save themselves and the other one who's very good at stewarding resources and paying down debt and allocating debt to the right places. Well, that's going to have a huge impact on how the money is handled as well. So there's a lot of dimensions, Clay, and I think learn to do by doing is a good model for 4-H, but then also be careful about being very clear in your job descriptions and then also having performance appraisals. And there's a new woman in our area, Lindsay Seafoot, who does HR for ag families. And, she's helped a lot of farm families draw up performance appraisals and employee contracts, just so there's lots of clarity and that people have benchmarks that they can work towards to know that they're doing things in the right direction. So all of this to say, I think, is that you want to professionalize your farm business more and more as much as you can.
And it becomes clear through that process Sometimes those performance evaluations end up, I'm just asking, sometimes those performance evaluations end up weeding out people who aren't qualified to come back. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and Dick's questions, he has a thing called 9.2. What are the strengths that you bring to this farm? What are the things that are weak and maybe need more support from management? Now, another question is, what's your learning plan? And I'm a lifelong learner, and I think everybody should be, because things are always changing in agriculture and in psychology and personality and communication, and we can always get better, right? And we can always learn more empathy and become an emotionally strong leader. And Carolyn Stern has just written a book called The Emotionally Strong Leader. And I think agriculture is now finally starting to get it, because we have a lot of mental wellness issues in terms of the health of farm families and people who are working at the same way and style their grandfathers did, and it's not sustainable. And families are fragmenting. Families are divorcing because people do not want to keep doing things the same way that were done years and years ago. And so a lot of negotiation. And Barry Johnson wrote a book on polarities, Clay, and a polarity is a problem that never goes away. So the fact that we work on farms and ranches, that's never going to go away. We have to work on our ranches and create good businesses, but we also need to have rest. We need to play. And so this is a dance between work and play. Another polarity would be working, like the action of executing all the things that need to be done operationally. But then the other side of that polarity is planning. Did you remember to get hay? Did you remember to buy seed? Did you remember to pre-buy the fertilizer? None of that happens unless there's been some pre-planning, right? So people have to understand that they get to choose how they wake up in the morning, with how they face the day, and how they're going to operate and manage themselves first, their internal world, and then how they react and respond and are proactive in their external world, and whether or not they're a nice person to be around. Because the retention, we're also talking about that in Vermont this week, retaining an employee is important, because it's going to cost you their salary plus 0.5, said the expert that was speaking there, 1.5 times. So if you have an employee that makes $50,000 a year, replacing them is going to cost you $75,000. Like, it's just, with lost opportunity cost, time, training, mistakes, all that other stuff. So it pays to be wise in terms of how you show up, and it pays to be intentional about how you're sharing the skills for that next generation.
Right. Cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Right.
And those things of, retaining employees is a great example of that, where it's going to cost you more to not do the work to maintain and retain those employees. And so it's worth the investment of whatever it takes. And I think that, to your point, one of the things that is required and is going to be probably more required in the future is emotional intelligence. We have a lot of IQ, I think, in our businesses or in our industry. There's a lot of really smart people from a lot of different perspectives. There's a lot of wisdom that they know a lot about the different ways and seasons of the year and how to prepare and get ready for those things. But that emotional intelligence is the one that is probably going to be the one that we need to focus on in the future, of being able to relate to people and communicate and it's really a lot of what we've been talking about today. And a lot of what we always talk about with, when we're together, culture, believe, behave, decide, ask for clear expression of intention, declare your intent, but all of that requires communication, emotional intelligence, understanding who you're working with, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how do they like to communicate, what are the things that get them excited, all of those things. So I guess, talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence, ways to develop it, ways to get better at relating to people?
Well, Carolyn Stern's book talks about doing an internal assessment first, Clay. So the other thing I find quite heartening is that more people are willing to go for counseling. Excuse me. So counseling is about recovery. Coaching is about discovery. And so there may be some stories that you're telling yourself from your childhood or the way your father and mother treated you in your transition story that you're carrying around as baggage or heavy things that aren't helping you make the best optimistic decisions going forward for your transition. So that might be something to explore. And I've just heard of a new counseling Zoom thing called betterhelp.com. And other people that I know personally have used it and found it quite helpful to get some clarity around there. And then again, I'm, of course, a big believer in conflict resolution as being something really good when you do it well and when you practice the good behaviors. And so people who are emotionally intelligent are willing to listen. They're willing not to make assumption or judgment. They're more than willing to come from curiosity and ask very what we call deep dive, open-ended, powerful questions, and actually really listen to the answer and response rather than trying to, think of a response while you're actually supposed to be listening to the other person. And again, there also comes a point, I think, in ranch families' desire to have better family harmony and dynamics where they realize that the other person doesn't want it as badly as they do. And so when I was in Iowa, I had a 9/16 wrench that I borrowed from Tanner Winterhoff from Farm for Profit podcast. And I held up this wrench in front of 500 farmers and I said, Elaine Froese can only fix Elaine Froese. And we need to take responsibility for the choices that we're making. Do we truly, sincerely want to be better as a person, as an employer, as a friend? What is our desire and what is the legacy that we want to leave when we're no longer here? And that's something that some people just drift through life, Clay, and they just say, whatever, meh, is what the young people say now. And that's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way, but you can't force another person to get better or to have more emotional awareness towards you. That's a skill or that's something that you can ask for or you could suggest, but they have to be the ones to actually do the work to practice being more present and making you feel seen and heard. Yeah.
Very good. We both have commitments coming up on the back end of this, and I appreciate your time today. Farmfamilycoach.com, still the place to send people, right? Yeah,
that's right. And we have a good team of coaches there. Happy to give you 20 or 30 minutes in a discovery call to help you take the next step and see whether some one-on-one coaching or being part of our membership site would be a good way for you to get group coaching every Tuesday of the month. If you'd like to sign up for that, the doors are closing for that in end of February, but they'll be open again in October and you can go on the wait list. And again, I just want to encourage people to sign up for our blog and insights because I'm happy to come into your inbox every Thursday with either a podcast or like what we're doing here or insights, Clay, for people to just keep taking the next step because it's their farm, it's their family, but it's ultimately your choice if you want that culture on your farm and ranch to improve and to have the life you've always wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Elaine, thanks again for your time today.
Pleasure to be here and reach out anytime. Nice to hear your voice again. Take care.
Very good stuff there. As always with Elaine, I really appreciate her taking the time to join me. Next week on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to talk to a board member, an elder at the church that I pastor, but we're going to talk to him about preparing to sell the ranch or preparing to buy property somewhere else. How do we get ready for a real estate transaction? So looking forward to talking to Tyson Hewitt next week on the Working Cows podcast about preparing for real estate transactions. We will see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.